Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I recently made a video on a guide where I have discussed a guide to internal control questions, where I've addressed how to answer internal control questions more specifically. And to follow with that guide, I have designed a practice question for you and would like to go through that guide myself as well with a practical example here. So we have a case study here, a very brief case study, and the first step would be to read the question, right? So the question here is basically the steps. In other words, so the first question is to identify internal control deficiencies at ABC company, the impact of weakness in the internal control system, and the third would be possible solutions to address those deficiencies, right? So there could be more questions as I have previously discussed in that video as well. For example, suggesting test of controls, right? So that would be one examiner could give you a case study where they have a few controls going on in there, and they could simply ask you what are the controls around a certain system. So for example, they can ask you internal controls around accounts receivable, or internal controls around accounts payable, or internal controls around fixed assets. But the key thing here would be they would be around financial statements, because in audit we are concerned about financial statements, and the financial statements should be free of material misstatements. Nevertheless, let's get started with reading the case study and answering the questions as well. Right, so we have first understood the requirement. We have to identify internal control deficiency, weakness, and we have to recommend solutions, right? So let's read the case study. It's ABC company is a medium-sized manufacturing company that produces different types of electronic devices. Right now, this information is important, but this information is not telling me anything about internal controls. So you can keep that aside, and you do not necessarily need to highlight each and every piece of information, which I forgot to mention in my previous video about on the guide on answering to internal control questions. You don't need to highlight everything. Just highlight what you think is important. Not everything is important. If you think everything is important, then I would suggest that you should work on understanding what things would be important. All right. So let's continue reading the case study here. The company has been in existence for over 20 years and has grown steadily over the years. Now they have been around for 20 years and they have grown steadily over the years, right? Okay. ABC company has a finance department that is responsible for accounting and financial reporting. The company has an internal audit department that periodically conducts audits to ensure that the company's internal controls are functioning effectively. So now you need to understand here that is the company has an internal audit department which checks on internal controls as well. And they have a separate accounting department which does the account, right? Sometimes if it's a small company, the accounting department might itself also do the internal controls as well. But they have a separate function here, maybe because the company is 20 years old, right? So during a routine internal audit, the internal audit department identified the material weakness in ABC's company's internal controls. The internal audit department discovered that the company accounts payable process was not functioning properly, right? So the internal controls are weak around accounts payable. So you can actually highlight this information that there are weaknesses around accounts payable. The internal audit department found that there was no segregation of duties. So that's one lack of internal control response. So that's one lack of internal control for approving invoices and payments, right? So they don't even have proper approving system as well. So that's another internal control deficiency, right? The internal audit department also discovered that the company did not have a proper system for reviewing and approving, as we discussed, right? So there are two internal control deficiencies there. The first one would be lack of segregation of duties. As I have said, I have actually highlighted, I have created separate paragraphs here. So lack of segregation of duties and lack of proper system of review and approval, right? So these are the two internal control deficiencies at ABC company. Now this question is relatively very simple and will not amount for many marks here. It would be around 2 to 3 marks per se, but and it's also easier for you to answer. If you know what to look for, then it's very easy to answer. And what to look for in internal controls is those 6 key internal controls that there are. If you don't know those, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below, and I will make another video on what those internal controls are actually. Let's look at the impact of these lack of internal controls, these lack of segregation of duty and lack of reviewing and approving. So the impact on that is the internal control deficiency identified by internal audit department could have a significant impact on ABC's company's financial statements. So we actually need to look at how it's going to impact. So this weakness in internal control, how it's going to impact the financial statements. Again, I would reiterate on this thing that in audit, we are concerned about financial statements, primarily speaking. So now what happens, because of lack of segregation of duties, this could lead to possible fraudulent activities, such as an employee creating and approving fake invoices for processing the payments, right? And now because there are fraudulent activities, and if they go unnoticed and undetected, they could result in going concern issue for the business. In other words, it could drive the business towards bankruptcy if the internal audit department wouldn't have noticed it. And if someone was doing fraud in there, and then of course, that is of concern. And this also means that the financial statements are not free from material misstatements either, right? And auditors will have a lot more duties to perform as well. Now let's look at what would be the impact of another internal control deficiency, which was lack of proper system of reviewing and approving. So lack of review and approval of vendor invoices before the payment could result in overpayments or payments for goods and services that were not received, right? So you could either do overpayments or underpayments per se, in simple words, and such overpayments and underpayments will potentially impact other items on the financial statements indirectly, such as under or overstatement of operating income, right? Because this is also going to impact cost of sales, inventory amounts, purchasing amount, and many more items in the financial statements, which will either impact the inventory valuation in the balance sheet or operating income for a statement of financial position. Again, what this is resulting in is basically financial statements which are not free from material statements. This could also impact the cash account per se, because there's either overpayment, which means that there's a lot of cash outflow, or you have paid for a certain good twice, then again it's an increased cash outflow, right? So these things will also impact cash account as well at the same time, indirectly on the statement of financial position, right? So this would be the impact of these two weak internal controls that we identified earlier in the case study. Now again, we will have to recommend some solutions, right? So recommendations would be another last question, part C of this case study. So the recommendation here would be segregation of duties. Of course, the company should do more segregation of duties. Now you will have to just write it in a proper sentence format, very well written, and using jargon as well, because that's how accounting examiners will understand that, okay, you know what you are talking about, rather than just simply stating that the company ABC should do more segregation of duties. But you have to apply that, how they have to do segregation of duties, right? You have to tell them how the company should do the segregation of duties. Just merely telling them that you have to do something doesn't tell you how you have to do it, right? When you are working as well, if someone comes and tells you that you need to do this without telling you how to do it, then it takes a lot more time to complete that task. And it is also a source of frustration to you as well, because you don't know how to do it. So you have to think from that perspective that, okay, fine, I'm telling this company that the company needs to do segregation of duties, but how they should do it, you will have to also explain that at the same time. So just read. So I hope these answers here would help you format your answers as well for professional exams, especially HKICPA, because a business assurance exam is one of the most difficult exams that they have. So let's read the answer here. The company should implement a proper segregation of duties between responsible. So this is where you are highlighting, right? So you said there's a proper, the company should do proper segregation of duties between persons responsible for approving invoice payments and the persons responsible for processing the payments, right? So person responsible for approving the invoice payments is different, and person responsible for processing payments is different. This would involve assigning different individuals to these roles and ensuring that they do not have the authority to perform both tasks, right? So this is how you identified on how to do segregation of duties more specifically, and you will be awarded points accordingly. Then the second one was review and approval of vendor invoices. The company should establish a system of reviewing and approving vendor invoices before payment. Now, how to do this? This would involve setting up a process whereby all vendor invoices are reviewed and approved by the designated employee before they are processed for payment, right? So this is how review and approval of the vendor invoices will be achieved. There would be a process, an employee would be assigned, and they will do the review and approve the vendor invoices. Then the third one was monitoring. The third recommendation will be monitoring. The company should establish a monitoring process, ensure that the segregation and duties and review and approval of vendor invoices are being performed effectively, right? So you suggested that, but if nobody is monitoring it, you suggested the improvements, but if nobody is monitoring those improvements, then there's a potential possibility that, you know, employee of the companies are not following what you told them to do, right? So you will have to review them periodic. You could have periodic reviews, you could have annual reviews. You can decide the timeline on that, but there will be always review of these things, right? So you have to review this as well. Another potential question, which is not the part of this video, would be, as I already mentioned earlier, would be suggesting test of controls, right? So you can be asked to suggest some test of controls for segregation of duties, review and approval of vendor invoices, and monitoring, right? So how to monitor, what would be the test of controls to make sure that someone was doing the monitoring or not, right? So this would be the part of recommendation. And finally, the conclusion, which is should be part of your every answer, because it summarizes what you have discussed in your actual answer. So the internal control deficiency identified by the internal audit department at ABC company is a serious issue that must be addressed promptly. By implementing the recommendations outlined above, the company can improve its internal control and reduce the risk of fraud and error in its accounts payable process, right? So you see, your conclusion has to be very brief. You could simply reiterate what you wrote, or just simply make a reference to the answer that you have written. And it is important that the company takes this issue seriously and works to address it in a timely and effective manner, right? So this would be your brief conclusion, where you would just summarize what has happened and what you have suggested, or just make a reference to the answer that you have written. I hope this practical example was helpful to you to put that internal control answer guide to perspective in your brain. And I hope that you will suggest my channel and my videos to other accounting students who are writing for accounting professional exams, or those who are thinking about studying accounting. This videos on this channel could help them understand if accounting is something that they would like to do. Once again, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you can like this video, comment down below to let me know what other topics you would like me to make videos on. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel because this would be for my motivation and support with the channel, and help YouTube channel grow as well. Thank you very much for watching this video again. Thank you.